You know what? I am going to go ahead and get started because it's right at noon. And as usual, we have a nice full agenda that we'd like to cover today. Jennifer, I think you have charge of the slides. Would you, I just want to welcome everyone, first of all, to our December K Club, the last of 2020. We will celebrate in style to see the last of everything in 2020 move on by. And before we get started, I did want to remind everyone that we really appreciate your feedback. It is what actually helps us set the curriculum for next semester. We truly wait until the last minute, not because we're procrastinators, but because we want to make sure that the topics that we cover are the most relevant to you. And so please, please, please make sure you respond to the very quick survey at the end. Let us know about today, what you liked, what you want to see more of in the future. And if you do, and give us your name, we don't share your name with anyone except for to put it in the Crown Royale bag that Barbara Kilborn has so that you can earn the chance to win our exclusive K Club water bottle, which now says supporting research or career development since 2009. So Barbara, would you please do the honors of drawing the name out of last month's survey respondents to let's see who the lucky winner is.
Yes. Be happy to do that. All right, and the winner is Brian Zanoni.
Yay, Brian. Yay. Congratulations, Brian. Very excited for you.
That's a pretty fancy water bottle. I'm jealous.
Yeah. Yes, it's super nice. Well, normally the panelists also get one, so we will make arrangements soon and we'll play catch up as soon as we're all back together. So before I introduce the speakers, I just wanted to mention something that, I feel like we are all doing the best we can with these virtual arrangements. With that said, there's just, and K Club has been great this fall, I think. I do think that being in person is more conducive to the interaction, and I miss that. And so I just want to invite everyone to please chime in. If you have questions, just, unmute yourselves. So keep yourselves muted for now, but if you have questions, unmute yourself, put them in chat, whatever you feel comfortable with, because we do want to hear from you. We want to make sure that you're able to ask your questions of the esteemed panelists that we have today. And so with that, Jennifer, if you want to move to the next slide. I'm going to do the honors of introducing our esteemed panelists. So I'm going to start with Mandy Ford. Dr. Ford received her PhD in immunology and molecular pathogenesis from Emory and is now a professor in the Division of Transplantation in the Emory Department of Surgery. She's also the scientific director of the Emory Transplant Center. Dr. Ford is extremely committed to research or career development. In addition to running her own research program on the cellular mechanisms of induction in allospecific T-cell responses, she also serves as the PI of the Emory Transplant Center's T32 training grant. She also is, sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes.
We lost you again.
We lost Stacy again, so I'm going to finish up her introductions. I think she was saying that Mandy Ford has served a mentor to not just one, but two of our Atlanta Pediatric Scholars Program K-12 scholars over the past few years. And she has a wealth of grant review experience. So we're lucky to have her as a panelist to share some insider tips on what reviewers look for specifically in career development grant applications. Stacy, are you back? I think we may have lost her for good. So thank you, Mandy, for being here today. Next, we have Dr. Claudia Morris. She received her MD degree from Eastern Virginia Medical School and did her residency and fellowship training at Children's Hospital Oakland, where she was awarded a K-23 to study a new arginine therapy in sickle cell disease patients. This work springboarded her career to where she is today as Professor of Pediatrics and Emergency Medicine, Research Director for the Division of Pediatric Emergency Medicine, and she also serves as co-director of the Center for Clinical and Translational Research in Pediatrics. In addition to these institutional leadership roles, She serves as PI on a multi-million-dollar U grant and an R grant to further study arginine therapy in sickle cell disease. Very relevant to the K Club, Claudia is also PI on a K-24 grant, which provides her with dedicated time to mentor emerging faculty scientists interested in patient-oriented research in arginine deficiency syndrome. Dr. Morris also has a lot of relevant experience as a grant reviewer that she will share with us today, including tips that in her experience will improve reviewer grant scores. And lastly, we're very excited that Jaime Rubin, the author of the National Research Mentoring Network presentation that we based this fall series on, is here with us live today. She received her PhD from Ontario Cancer Institute at the University of Toronto and now serves as Vice Chair for Investigator Development in the Department of Medicine at Columbia University Medical Center. Importantly, she is the course director for funding and grantsmanship for research and career development activities, a 7-session deep dive into the world of research grants with a focus on grantsmanship training. We include a link to her course later on in our slides. And it is her, like I said, her session that we've been featuring this fall. So again, we're very lucky that apparently her kids Googled her and discovered that we are doing a series on her, and we get to have her here live today. Before we get started on the presentation itself, we like to go over a few K Club specials. Today we have the CTSA T32 Like Clinical and Translational Research Training Award. This is for either postdoctoral or predoctoral trainees, and the deadlines are February 15th and March 15th. The second is the CTSA KL2 Award. This is for junior faculty who are interested in clinical and translational research, and the deadline for this award is March 1st. Last, there is a great new resource online that we wanted to make you aware of, and this is for clinical research professionals. So whether that is the investigator or research coordinators you have working with you, or anyone who's interested in clinical research, can take these free online courses for continuing education contact hours. So today is the third of our 3-part series on transitioning to research independence. Here is the link to Dr. Rubin's grants course that I mentioned a minute ago I would include here. There's lots of slides on that site that are similar to what you'll see today that you may be interested in. In October, we covered types of NIH awards, and in November, we covered grantsmanship. So today we're going to go over review processes. Since we are lucky to have Dr. Rubin here live, we're only going to play 2 clips from her original presentation. The first will be about the sequence of events after you submit your application, and the second will cover review criteria for grants. In between those 2 segments, we'll stop to allow plenty of time to pull from our panel's collective expertise, and also ask Dr. Rubin to walk us through a few additional slides that are specific not just to research grants, but career development grants. So our first clip, again, is what happens after you submit your application.
What is the sort of sequence of events after you submit an application? So let's look at cycle 3. So you just submitted an application, and usually in the October, November deadlines that we discussed. It's 3 months until the grant is reviewed, around 3 months, let me say. The grant is reviewed. 3 months later until the advisory council of that particular institute, let's say the Cancer Institute, looks at all the scores and makes a decision, yes or no, whether they're going to fund it, and another 3 months until NIH issues the award notice. So it's about a 9-month process with 3 3-month steps. So submitting in for the October, November deadlines, maybe you'll get an award by the beginning of July. So what does the application process look like? This is a very old picture that I had, black and white, from a hard copy booklet that NIH had issued many years ago, but I think it lays things out very clearly. Investigators come together They submit an application and it goes to the NIH, and it'll go specifically to the Center for Scientific Review, where they will, in the old days, let's say, open the FedEx box, look at the application, and they'll make two decisions. One is what study section will review the grant and what institute will fund the grant when it gets a wonderful score. So it is critical that your grant end up in the right study section or review group. NIH now has a form which can be included in the application where you can specifically ask for a specific study section. So one should research the different study sections and then complete that form. Even though it's optional, I strongly encourage everybody to research the different study sections, their areas of research that are under their purview, and then complete that form and submit with the application. It's an administrative form. It's not seen by the grant reviewers. It's only seen by the administrators. But even if you've completed a wonderful and very strong grant with exciting science, it needs to go to the right study section where individuals have the appropriate expertise and can understand how exciting proposal you've put together. If it goes to the wrong study section where the reviewers don't have the right areas of expertise, you won't get as informed a review as possible. And you can also request a specific institute. That's usually fairly straightforward. Eye Institute, Cancer Institute, and so forth. So after the review is done at the Center for Scientific Review, the Center for Scientific Review then sends the grant to all the different institutes, which will then fund the grant. And just as a reminder, in most cases, the research grants are reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review. Most fellowships are reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review. The Ks, the Career Development Grants, are reviewed at the Institute, and the RFAs are reviewed at the Institute because they're the ones that have put up the money. And so NIH will say that they have a dual review system. One is that initial review where you will get a score, which we will go through at the study section at the scientific review group. And then it'll go to the Institute's council to look at the scores from the study sections and to make the final decision on whether the grant should get funded. In the vast majority of cases, the Institute will follow what the study section says. And so this is a newer slide, which is a little bit more complicated, but I think it's also informative, so I'll go through it a little bit. So you submit an R01 grant that goes to the Center for Scientific Review. They assign it to its study section. It's reviewed at the study section. It gets a score, and then it goes to the Institute's council. It gets a great score, a fundable score, and then the Institute, in this case, Allergy and Infectious Disease, makes an award. The other neat thing about NIH is that after the grant ends, you can submit a competing renewal, another grant building on what you've already learned in the first grant. Let's say after it went to the study section, it didn't get such a great score, and so it wasn't funded. You get all of the comments back from the reviewers. You respond very strongly to all of the reviewers' comments. And the neat thing about NIH is that you then submit a revised application, an amended application. And then it will go back to the same study section. And the reviewers will read this new grant, and they will also look at how well you responded to the reviewers' comments the first time. They won't have the initial application, but they will have the comments from the initial application. And so part of their determination on whether to fund the second application is how well you responded to the first application.
So Dr. Rubin, you talked a lot in that clip about making sure your application gets to the correct place. And one element of that is the PHS assignment request form, which I've added here. Would you like to explain what this is?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to participate today. So this is the new form, the PHS assignment request form. It's optional. It's technically optional, but I think everybody should complete it no matter what type of application you're submitting. I'm not sure how you technically submit applications at your institution. If there's a research administrator that's helping you, you need to tell them to activate the form, because as it's an optional form, it's sort of, the link is sort of up there in the top left corner of the assist form. And a research administrator who might not know how important this form is many times does not alert junior investigators to the existence of this form. So please ask them to activate this form. 4 components. If you could just go back to the previous slide, sorry. The first component asks you what institute you want the grant to go to. So as I said, it's usually obvious: cancer or heart, lung, and blood. The second is what study section. Now for K grants, it will automatically go to that institute's K review committee. So unlike a research grant, it will go to that institute's K review committee. Continue in the next slide, the sections 3 and 4 usually don't see any responses in section 3 where you would list reviewers that you don't want to get your grant. But very important, no matter what application, is that 4th section where you can put in keywords or keyword phrases describing areas of expertise that the reviewers want. Well, let's say your grant is about kidney research. Well, it could be completely different areas. It could be imaging or bioinformatics or transplantation. And here you can really sort of narrow down the expertise and help the review administrator make the right assignment for you so you have the most informed review possible. Thank you.
Thanks. And I also added the scores on, or how to find success rates on different K awards. You had this slide in one of your presentations that was really helpful for K23 application success rates.
Right, so there is a tremendous amount of information up there. There are some very large Excel files, but you can go in there and select your particular institute, your particular type of K, K23, K08, and so forth, and really look at, drill down and look at the number of applications, the number of awards, and success rate, usually over the past 10 years. So there's a tremendous amount of information available.
Thank you. Dr. Ford and Dr. Morris, do you have any specific tips for junior investigators in terms of how to make sure their application gets to the right place as it navigates through a somewhat complicated sequence of events after the submission date?
So I think, as was just brought up, if it's a K23 application, you want to make sure you're sending it to the right center, but it will get directed to the mentored award study section. Other than that, I think a lot of the key points have been brought up already. And quite honestly, I wish I had this sort of information when I was applying for my K23.
Yeah, and I would just add, I know that some, or presumably some on the line are, at the level of maybe thinking about the next step, but that I would just really encourage, as you move to the R application, to talk with your SROs, right? So, reach out to SROs or reach out to colleagues to find out what's the insider scoop on where the application of your topic should go, because sometimes the keywords that are listed online, while they're accurate, just that insider information about where those applications are best targeted is really helpful. So, reach out to SROs, reach out to program officers, reach out to colleagues, and just make sure that you're in the right spot.
I think that's actually an excellent point, because particularly a lot of folks who are new to this may be shy about reaching out to the NIH, and the program officers can be so incredibly helpful. I mean, and one of the other pieces too is if you're combing, available RFAs, for instance, And you can get more information about that RFA. For, you know, even just last year, I reached out to a program officer about an RFA in the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. And it turns out that the funding for that RFA was already spoken for, but it was still listed, right? So by that phone call saved me weeks of effort. So that can be really helpful. They can encourage you to submit for a certain RFA, or they may actually direct you or redirect you to a different RFA. So make use of the staff at NIH, and they're usually delighted to speak to junior faculty and trainees.
It sounds like there's no substitute for just picking up the phone.
Yeah.
You just won't be able to read that online.
I agree.
This is Stacy. Jennifer, can I ask a quick question about contacting program officers?
Sure.
So, you know, I think that in my experience of working with young investigators, there's probably about 90 to 95% of program officers are delighted, just as you said, Claudia, and are super helpful and really care. You know, sometimes you'll get a program officer that maybe is in a difficult, busy time of life and you don't get a response. Do any of our three panelists have hints on how to compel a program officer that's not as responsive to respond? Are there any tricks of the trade?
Persistence.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, you know, polite persistence, right? So, you know, continuing to just send that email, you might hit them at the right time that they're able to respond, but definitely not, I would advise, you know, getting testy or
Yeah.
irritated. You know, I've emailed you, sometimes just resending the email, you know, you don't have to say, I've emailed you before and but just, you know, send it again.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll hit them at a right moment.
Yeah, being gracious goes a long way.
Thank you.
Are there any resources available to help you assess the scientific expertise that will be on a specific study section, like a study section roster? And if so, how do you find that?
So the K committees are not as well posted or advertised across all the institutes, but certainly all of the research study sections that are in the Center for Scientific Review, they all have separate pages. They all have descriptions. There's even a listing of related study sections if you don't think that's the right one. And they have a list of the reviewers. You may not contact the reviewers, but you know, it's all public committees. The listing of the reviewers is all there. You should recognize some of the names. That might tell you that this is the right study section for you because you recognize the names, so they're in your field. The other thing I might suggest is sort of reverse checking, is go into NIH Reporter. You know, this fantastic database that NIH has online, which lists every single award. Well, put in different study sections you can select, and then see what grants successfully came out of that study section. If they look like they're in the same field as you, well, that gives you an idea that you're in the right place. If they don't look like, and you can see the titles in the abstracts, that they're a good fit for what you're proposing, then that probably means that it's not the right study section for you.
That's really helpful. And that is also a good segue into once you know who have an idea of who the reviewers are going to be on the study section, what are the criteria that they're going to be looking at with your grant? So for our next segment, we're going to play a 4-minute clip on the criteria for research grants. And then we're going to have a discussion about how those are similar to and different from career development grants.
And so what are the scores? The scores are 1 to 9, whole integers, though basically to get funded, you need to get, I would say, 1, 2, or 3. And that on the right-hand side is sort of a very qualitative description of what each of these numbers mean. And the scores, you will get what's called an overall impact score, which is the average of the impact scores offered by everybody at the study section. And what I've copied here is the review criteria from that sort of generic parent R01 that I discussed earlier in today's presentation. And basically, what are they looking for? Grants for which there's a likelihood of the project to exert a sustained and powerful influence on the particular research field that's being addressed, a major scientific impact. There are 5 main and core research criteria. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but A, significance of the project that you're discussing. Why is it important? The investigative team. So it's you and your collaborators, co-investigators, demonstrating that what you're proposing is innovative, and the approach. How are you going to answer the questions? So you talk about the significance. You talk about what questions you want to answer. So the approach is your methodology, if you will. And this is where you would include preliminary data or pilot data demonstrating the feasibility of what you're proposing. And then your research environment, demonstrating that you have the right core facilities or patient population or whatever you need to do the research. And the reviewers will address each of these 5 areas in bullet points, the strengths and weaknesses. If you don't get funded the first time, it is these weaknesses that you need to address in the amended application, the second resubmission that goes in. I just want to highlight some other additional review criteria. Something that has just changed in NIH applications is if you're doing research with human subjects, it used to be women, minorities, and children. It's now women, minorities, and individuals across the lifespan. And as I mentioned, if you're resubmitting an application that wasn't funded the first time, you need to very strongly respond to the previous reviewer's comments. Similarly, a relatively new area that's now being addressed, especially for those doing bench research, authenticating key biological chemical resources. So for instance, antibodies, demonstrating that, you know, they have the activity that you're describing. And then also the budget and period of support, as this is especially true for new investigators, demonstrating that you have enough money to do what you say you're going to do and enough time. There's tremendous emphasis recently on rigor and reproducibility, so I want to bring up these 4 areas that NIH and the reviewers are looking for. The rigor of the prior research that you're building upon, that you're presenting a rigorous experimental design, power analysis, how many animals are in the study, how many human subjects, how the data is going to be analyzed, the consideration of biological variables, sex as a biological variable, and the key biological or chemical resources that we discussed.
So this, I wanted to highlight the difference specifically in how overall impact is defined for a research grant versus a K award. Whereas for a research grant, it's focused on the science and the project itself. With a K award, this definition is also expanded to emphasize how well the grant award would impact the candidate's career development and research plan and their potential for an independent research career. There's also some other specific individual review criteria that we're going to go through one by one. Dr. Rubin, if you wouldn't mind spending about 2 minutes walking us through your slides on each of those criteria, and then
Sure.
we can have a mini question and answer session. So
Okay,
if
sure.
the audience thinks of any questions that as you're talking, please feel free to enter them in the chat box.
Sure, thank you. If you could just go back 1 slide very quickly. I just wanted to say that sort of everything on the, thank you, on the left-hand side with regard to the research grants all goes into that research plan on the right-hand side, the second from the bottom. These are the kinds of things, significance and innovation and so forth, are also a consideration, if you will, when they look at the research plan. So going forward, each of these different 5 areas, I'm sorry if you could change the slide. These are all of these criteria are listed in the funding announcement that you are responding to. So this isn't hidden anyway. I think I cut and pasted these from the generic K-23 application, if I remember correctly. And so these are the criteria, the different bullet points that the reviewers are looking for. So the candidate, and you could just move. And especially the reference letters. As you know, K applications have these confidential reference letters, and the reviewers do look at them. You can't see them. So think carefully about who you're going to ask, 3 to 5 individuals who write these reference letters. And moving forward to the next section.
Actually, I thought it would be helpful if we could,
Okay.
if we could stop in between.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Again, anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please send them in chat. And then Dr. Morris and Ford, do you have any thoughts on the candidate section specifically?
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up is around the reference letters, and choose wisely, right? Because a good reference letter is a bad reference letter for those who are on the study section, right? I mean, these reference letters really should be exceptional. So you want to identify folks that you've worked with who think you're terrific and that you're going to add significantly to, the scientific community. One of the other things in the candidate description, so this applies more for the K awards, and this is coming from a perspective, so I'm actually on the study section for NHLBI, K23s and K24s, and I've started collecting a running list of new things that I wish I knew when I wrote my K that come up during study section where it's like, gosh, I wish that those writing these applications knew this. And there are some institutions that do a much better job than others of making sure that their applications include all these key points. And I'll just throw out Hopkins as one of them. I mean, it's almost like they must share like a perfect application with all of their group because they are similar in that sense, but they have all the main ingredients. And some things that just make it easier for the reviewer is in your candidate description. One, do not make them guess as to how many publications you have. And I see this so often. They'll be referring to these various publications, but then in their biosketch, they'll repeat the same publication. So you as a reviewer will spend 20 minutes just trying to figure out how many they have. So a little tip that is really nice is in your biosketch as well as in your candidate description is at the very bottom of your personal statement. If you say, to date, I published X number of papers in peer review with X number first authored, and then list your top, publications right in that space, it just is like all of a sudden they've got that piece on the candidate to say, wow, this is a really productive person. And I mean, I think I'll let others make comments as far as candidates pieces, but just put it out there. Don't make your reviewers guess at your strengths and your accomplishments. You really want to list them very clearly. I've seen some candidates put their accomplishments in a beautiful table where, again, it's just so easy to find and to, rewrite into your review.
I think that those are great points. I think folks don't mention things in the candidate section. They say, well, it's in my biosketch. And then I say, well, your biosketch is 35 pages later, and they haven't got to your biosketch. And so they don't realize, because the application is uploaded in pieces, if you will, they don't really see it as one entity. I suggest that folks cite themselves, not only say, well, I got a paper published, but I say there should be little 1s and 2s and 3s. So go ahead and cite yourself in your major papers. And then you're listed on the front page, if you will, of the literature cited section. Why not?
Yeah, I think those are all great points of ways to, highlight and really put on display your accomplishments. I would just add that, in reference letters that I write for others, and I'm not shy about, bolding or underlining or italicizing the key points in that letter. And so you can, if you're helping or providing, some draft verbiage to your reference letter writers about the, just the key accomplishments that you've done. I think that's a great way to ensure that, these tired reviewers, right, that are reading 10 or more of these applications late at night on top of writing their own grants, that they're not going to miss, oh, that was a high profile, paper that you published. And so bolding it, like bolding that sentence or italicizing it, I think is a great way to make sure that it's highlighted.
That's
And
great.
yeah, I just also would say that when folks talk about their previous research experiences, it shouldn't just be a list. They should talk about how their interests changed or evolved and why they did something like this, and then they got interested in that, and what they learned and what their contribution was from each of those research experiences. It's supposed to flow as a narrative and not just be a list.
That's all really great information. We also have a couple questions in the chat. One person would like to know if all of the reference letters should be from the institution, and can consultants write reference letters?
So it's better if they're not from the same, all from the same institution where you are. So if you, I tell people you can sort of go down one career level. So if you had a previous research experience, certainly somebody with a PhD, that would be their thesis supervisor. And to show that there are folks outside your institution who you've collaborated with, or you've was a co-investigator with, that strengthens the application if not all the letter writers are from your current institution.
And another question, is there any benefit or advantage to selecting the same institute that funded your K when submitting your R01? Is there institutional memory that favors a previously funded investigator?
So I would say no. But generally, one is submitting an R based on and using, if you will, the preliminary results and so forth of their K. So usually it would follow. So the request for the institute of the R grant submission should be one that what your specific aims matches the mission of that specific institute.
Great, thank you for that. And that leads really well into the second section of
Jennifer, could
yes.
I just answer? Can we just go back to that first question about if consultants can write letters of reference?
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
No. I just wanted to say that there's sort of two things going on here, because there's mentor letters and there's letters of reference, and they're two very different things. And in the application, you've got 6 pages for the mentors to sort of write this recommendation. It's not really a recommendation, it's what they're going to do for the candidate. And then there's an additional 6 pages for the rest of the mentor team, and that includes consultants. And anyone who's a part of your mentor team cannot write a letter of reference. And so I just wanted to differentiate those sort of 2 buckets of letters. The letters, the mentor letters and mentor team letters are part of the application, and then the letters of reference are a separate thing that you ask people and they submit outside of your application.
Thank you so much.
That's right. That's right. The people who write the letters of reference are supposed to be separate from what's proposed in the application.
Thank you so much for that important distinction. That is a really important clarification. In terms of the career development plan, Dr. Rubin, could you walk us through your slides here about what is being looked for in that plan?
Right. So, many times folks spend a tremendous amount of time on the research plan and on the specific aims, and then sort of as a sort of last thought in the week before the deadline, focus on the career development plan. But this is a critical part of the application that should get just as much care and attention as the research plan. And this is the different types of research skills and career development skills that the individual will gain during the course of the 5 years of the grant. So one will take courses, let's say in biostatistics or in imaging or whatever. So technical skills, what conferences they're going to go to, and so forth. And also the skill set of learning to run a research group, how to manage a grant, how to manage a research group. A time to go to workshops, formal courses. I would say at your national meeting every year, many times there are sessions and organizations for junior investigators. You would join all those. In New York, we have the New York Academy of Science and the New York Academy of Medicine that have programs. So put together a robust plan of career development activities that augment the current research that's proposed, as well as the research that you discuss that you will pursue as an independent investigator. So it's a little complex because this part and the research plan part are written separately, but they really have to be presented in an integrated way. My research involves imaging, so I'm going to take this course or this workshop on imaging and so forth. Or, I don't really need it right now, a course in biostatistics because we have such a great biostatistics core, but I can see that moving forward, I should have a greater competency, if you will, in biostatistics. So I'm going to take a couple of courses in biostatistics. Some folks even, let's say, will get a master's degree in biostatistics or patient-oriented research. And the K also allows that and can also pay for the tuition of that master's degree. And just also to mention monitoring and evaluating, we always recommend that folks have an advisory committee. And so maybe the advisory committee should meet yearly and there's a formal presentation by the mentee and the mentor. And this is an opportunity for monitoring and evaluating the progress that the individual is making, both in terms of their career development activities as well as the research activities.
And that's actually a really good point because the K application instructions doesn't say much about an advisory committee, but that at least from NHLBI perspective, has become really important, considered a strength in applications and a weakness if it's not there.
It can't hurt.
And Dr. Ford, what would you say as a reviewer is the most important thing that you look for in this section?
Yeah, I mean, I think the points that Dr. Rubin brought up I would agree with those. I think that I guess I would highlight what she mentioned about really that this section is well integrated into the scientific aims, such that it is clear that we can see how this funding is going to propel you to become an independent investigator in this area. And so, what skills do you not have now that you want to, that you're going to use this K to develop, right? I think you don't want to come across as, well, I already, know everything about this area, right? Because then it's not really a career development grant. So highlighting how the skills, the new courses, the new collaborative, relationships that you're going to set up during this time are going to provide the foundation for springboarding you to the next level of our level funding.
And I would recommend as trainees are actually putting their application together, and I mean, this is true for your research design too, but you want to have your short and long-term goals established. So what are you doing within that next 1 to 2, the first 2 years, and then the long-term goals, which also includes the springboard to independence. And one of the things you want to highlight just in your research design, you want to highlight gaps in knowledge that your research contribution is going to fill. In the career development plan, you want to highlight gaps in skills. And those are something that you can bold, right? taking X classes in bioinformatics is going to, address the gap in my knowledge in order to, and then tie it together to your research plan. The easier and better that you spoon feed your reviewer where you're going with this, because what I see is there's some applications, and I was guilty of this myself in early applications, is assuming that your reviewer knows all about your work and you think it's so important, right? So of course they think it's so important, but if you do not tell them why it's so important, they won't understand. So you want to make it as clear as possible.
Great. Well, it sounds like you're going to lead a lot of support and advice too in implementing your career development plan, which leads into our segment on, oh, I thought we had mentors next.
It's the next section after number 4.
The mentors is next section. Okay, so let's do research plan next then, and then we'll get to all the people that are going to help you actually operationalize that career development plan.
So the research plan section really is no different than the research plan section, if you will, for a research grant or an R01. That's why I said in that first slide, everything about the research, the significance and so forth, the approach and everything is part of the research plan, but just with a few caveats. One is it has to be done or doable by somebody at your career stage and the time frame that's allowed by a K, whether it's 4 years or 5 years or what you're requesting for. And also it's supposed to be the springboard, if you will, for an independent research career. So it's supposed to lead to the point where you're going to publish a lot of papers and will provide the foundation for your R01 grant as an independent investigator. So in one sense, it's a transition award to allow you to put together a very competitive R01 application that hopefully will be funded.
Would any of our other panelists like to add anything to Dr. Rubin's slides?
I think that one point that, again, trainees, you have all this enthusiasm and these great plans of what you're going to get done, but being overambitious is considered a weakness. You've got people sitting around the room who've been doing this for decades, and they know what a K applicant can accomplish. So if you oversell yourself, that's gonna, you're gonna pay for it in your score. So be realistic. And the thing is I have seen some applications though where it is like, ridiculous what the applicant is saying they're gonna do, but they've already had a track record that supports this, highly productive behavior. So, be able to support what you say you're doing with past experiences, but also be realistic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As with any application, you want to go deep and not broad, but definitely not being overly ambitious in a K application, I think is really important. And, I think reviewers more so than an R level application are going to be looking for feasibility, right? Do you have, as Dr. Morris suggested, do you have the expertise to accomplish this, or have you enlisted the correct collaborators and investigative team, mentorship team that will help you with this? And so I think providing, a little bit more detail on, exactly how you're going to do this, have the appropriate references, have alternatives, and importantly, if you don't have, rock solid expertise in that particular approach that you are proposing, you want to make sure that you have enlisted a collaborator and a letter of support if they're not on, your mentorship team, that is going to ensure that you can demonstrate the feasibility to successfully complete those experiments.
And just wanted to add that if this section is not written well, it's not good science, or it's overly ambitious, if there are really some significant problems, it speaks to our next section, the problem with mentorship. If the application is not well written, or there really are some significant problems with the science or whatever, it sends a signal to the reviewers, or it can, that the mentor hasn't read the application or the mentor hasn't been involved in the development of the application. And so it sends a signal to the reviewers that if the mentor is not going to spend a few hours reading the application of their K-mentee, how much supervision really, how much mentorship are they really going to give this individual over the next 5 years? If they weren't involved in the application, then really how involved are they going to be over the next 5 years? So the the mentor-mentee relationship is really very special. And it's very different than collaborators or co-investigators. It can be a relationship that one can continue, after the 4 or 5 years and throughout one's career. So the reviewers really look at what are the qualifications of this mentor. Have they mentored people in the past successfully? Have they mentored folks at this career stage? So junior investigators launching into independent research careers. Are they supportive of the individual in all of these career development activities? Are they supportive of them doing a master's degree or doing these courses or going to these meetings, as opposed to, no, they can't leave the lab for the next 5 years? Do they have funding to support the individual's research? So most K awards, in the vast majority of cases, will not be able to support the research expenses. So does the mentor have R01 or other funding that will support the research? How many other people are they mentoring at the same time? They might be the world's best mentor, but if they're already mentoring a bunch of students and postdocs and other junior faculty, they can't really adequately mentor this particular individual. And so many times, let's say if the mentor is not the best fit scientifically, or they don't have, they're too junior themselves, or they don't have the appropriate funding, many times that's when we suggest bringing in a co-mentor who can then address the weak areas. And this co-mentor team then checks all the boxes, if you will. They have the right funding, they have the right mentoring experience. And as a team, they can really sort of cover the waterfront, if you will, of all of the mentor's responsibilities towards this mentee.
I think you touched on all of the points on your slides. And now to draw on the rest of our panel, is there anything that you would like to add to Dr. Rubin's comments on your mentoring and consulting collaborator team?
Yeah, I think one of the things that often gets forgotten about, and again, it can be a weakness if it's not there, is making sure that you have someone on the mentorship or co-mentorship team who has statistical expertise. Because the reviewers are really looking for that. And I think in some institutes, it's like, well, of course I have a statistician, right? I mean, because we've got a biostatistical core and they give us free hours because we're trainees. The reviewers don't know that. So if it's not there, they assume you don't have it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was just going to say something similar, which is just make sure that everyone on your mentorship team, that you have specifically outlined, what that person is, specifically going to contribute. So you don't need a lot of redundancy, but just making sure that if you have a number of people on there, that it's clear what each bring to the table.
And making sure from a content expertise that you do have everything covered.
This is the kind of thing that looks good in a table as
Yes.
opposed to paragraph after paragraph. So a nice little table talking about each individual person, their title and their role and expertise, lays it out in a very nice graphic for the reviewers.
And if you want to make your table really, powerful, you add an extra line, which actually talks about the number of hours that you're meeting with your mentorship team. Because that's also something that individuals often get dinged at is they don't specify the mentorship plan of how much they're meeting, or they'll say, I'm meeting with my mentor once a month. And, your primary mentor, you should be meeting with them weekly. Now it's by Zoom as opposed to in person, but you want to make sure that it says that in the application.
I suggest that folks be very specific. We meet every Thursday morning, 10 a.m.
Yes. It
And
seems
then
like
the
a
men-
small thing, but it's appreciated.
Yeah, and the men to put that in their statement also. And
Yes.
hopefully it's the same time that they both quote.
Yes, make sure that you correlate your comments with your application and your mentorship letter of support. The other thing that sometimes is helpful when you're talking about your mentors, because again, you have a biosketch and it's in the mentor's biosketch, but that's, as mentioned, it's 35 pages ago, is to make sure that it states the mentorship funding and how they're going to support the mentee specifically. You know, and listing the trainees of the mentors, the past trainees, is also really helpful.
Great, that is really helpful. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we also have time to comment on the importance of not just all of the people, but the environment and the institutional commitment to the candidate in your application.
So very briefly, it's very important that the letter from the department chair or whoever's writing the institutional letter say that the individual has 75% protected time for the research and career development activities described in the application. That's critical because in most cases, the K awards require 75%. And the only other thing I would say is just to make sure that you present to the reviewers that the Institute has all of the technical resources that you need, patient population or whatever, or core facilities to do the research, as well as discuss the programs to help junior investigators, like this cake club, whatever else, didactics or programs or workshops that your institute has to support junior investigators launching into independent research careers.
One question we had that relates both to this and the last section is, as far as statistical support, if you have support from a core, is that enough if you clearly state the type of support, or should you also have a statistician as part of your mentorship team?
Well, at the very least, that's what those letters of support are, not the reference letters, but that 6-page other category. Get a letter of support from the director of that core saying that they're glad to help out. If there's somebody that's very integral to the project and a greater role in terms of biostatistics, then get their letter and include their biosketch.
And related to that, another question we have is, when applying for a K award, do the reviewers put any weight on the success of those who write your reference letters?
Well, the people who write the reference letters, you know, they should talk about how they're convinced that you will continue to be a success in academic research. So it would be good if they were sort of role models in this regard, if you will. But I'll let the two other reviewers chime in here.
I think that that's true. I mean, when you're looking at your letters of support and your mentorship team, the success of those individuals is important because they're going to be providing you with some training to move forward. So, and what they're looking for success is a strong publication track record, a funding track record. So if you have a mentor on your team that has no funding, I can guarantee you that that's going to be part of the discussion. And then also looking at the number of trainees that mentor has had in the past, where they've either the trainee has gone on to get independent funding and publications and such.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, and particularly for reference letters, you know, sometimes even the more experience that individual has had and their ability to rank or, you know, make comments about you relative to all the other candidates at this level that they've encountered, right? So the more sort of successful or experienced they are, the greater ability that they would be perceived to be able to make that judgment. So, and I think it is just, you know, kind of human nature. I mean, just from my experience on study section, that if you've got a highly well-known, very successful letter writer, that is going to potentially carry more weight. So not that you want to use that as your only criterion on which to identify who your letter writers should be, but it can't hurt.
But they have to have had an experience with you where they feel comfortable saying, this person ranks in the top 5% or this person ranks in the top 1%. And when I do get letters, when I'm looking at letters from someone that says this trainee is in the top 1%, and they have this history of working with trainees, that actually does mean something.
Great. Well, we're unfortunately out of time for today. Thank you so much to all three of our panelists, Dr. Rubin, Dr. Ford, Dr. Morris. We really appreciate your time today. I included a couple slides at the end here about rigor and reproducibility, which Dr. Rubin actually talked about in one of the clips we played earlier. So I just wanted to emphasize these as things that are evaluated through all the review criteria. And there were a couple questions in the chat we didn't get to that we'll be sure to follow up on. But again, thank you so much to all of our panelists this morning.
Thank you for the invitation. Enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, I just wanted to make one point that I think is critical for the revisions, right? So revise, don't rebut. No matter how tempting, no matter how much you feel like the reviewer just doesn't understand you, just be very gracious. Thank you for that comment, and respond to as much of the reviewer's criticisms as possible without sounding offended. That's key. Thank you so much.
Pick up the phone and be gracious. Those are our tips. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.